Imagine the greatest military power of the ancient world facing the ultimate modern titan. Rome, at its absolute peak, stands against the United States of America. We are talking about legionaries matching up against stealth bombers and nuclear submarines. It sounds like an instant massacre in favor of the modern age. We have to set absolute rules to make this a true thriller. America cannot just press a button and vaporize Rome from across the globe. We strip away the nuclear arsenal and orbital satellite strikes. Both empires are transported to a massive and neutral supercontinent. This creates a pure battle of logistics and tactical genius. Rome has 75 million people and massive reserves of raw materials. America has advanced technology but incredibly limited fuel and ammunition. Rome only has to survive until the modern war machine runs completely dry. The war begins on the open ground. American armored divisions strike first with terrifying speed and precision. Tanks roll across the plains and easily shatter the front lines of the Roman infantry. It looks exactly like the one-sided slaughter everyone naturally expects. The Roman commanders are not foolish or primitive. They quickly analyze the massive logistical weakness of the American ground forces. The Romans adapt immediately by scattering their forces into dense forests and harsh mountain passes. They force the heavy American armor into terrain where speed means absolutely nothing. The first major twist of the war happens in the deep valleys. Roman engineers trigger artificial landslides to trap American convoys on narrow mountain roads. Heavy machinery is suddenly pinned down by thousands of tons of rock and dirt. The invincible modern war machine suddenly grinds to a devastating halt. The legions now attack the trapped convoys using endless waves of skirmishers. They wait for the cover of absolute darkness to strike instead of fighting head-on. Thousands of flaming arrows rain down to destroy the lightly armored fuel trucks. Without fuel, the mighty modern tanks simply become giant metal tombs. Rome sacrifices thousands of men just to destroy a single supply column. This is a terrifying but completely logical mathematical trade for the ancient empire. Human life is heavily abundant for Rome, while bullets and gasoline are strictly finite for America. The ground war slowly transforms into an agonizing war of pure attrition. The American generals realize they are losing the ground battle on logistics alone. They must change their strategy entirely to break the Roman spirit. Air supremacy is the ultimate American trump card. The sky is about to rain absolute fire upon the ancient world. Jet fighters scream across the clouds at impossible speeds. They target massive Roman supply depots and fortress cities deep behind enemy lines. The Romans have absolutely no weapons capable of reaching the modern aircraft. The psychological terror of these invisible air raids is completely paralyzing. However, the Roman intellect shines brilliantly even against impossible odds. They notice the flying machines require massive flat roads to take off and eventually rest. Rome secretly mobilizes hundreds of thousands of slaves to tunnel deep beneath the earth. The underground war begins quietly beneath the secure American air bases. The ancient engineers dig for weeks in complete silence. They completely undermine the runways of the primary American airfields. Huge caverns are hollowed out directly beneath the massive concrete landing strips. The underground network is held up by thousands of thick wooden pillars. Roman scouts watch the modern jets returning from their bombing runs. They wait until the heaviest cargo planes touch down on the runway. The engineers deep below set fire to the wooden support pillars. The earth collapses entirely and swallows the landing strips into massive sinkholes. Millions of dollars of irreplaceable aircraft are destroyed in a matter of seconds. Fighter jets crash violently into the newly formed craters. The American air superiority is suddenly crippled by men wielding pickaxes and shovels. This brilliant tactical strike forces the modern empire to rethink everything. The conflict now shifts aggressively to the open ocean. America deploys massive aircraft carriers and devastating nuclear submarines. These iron leviathans patrol the coasts to completely block Roman trade routes. It seems completely impossible for wooden galleys to fight metal warships. The Roman fleets are initially pulverized by modern long-range missiles. Entire armadas are turned into floating splinters before they even see the enemy. The Roman high command realizes the open water is a complete death trap. They pull all their surviving ships into extremely shallow coastal waters and narrow rivers. Modern submarines cannot operate safely in shallow river deltas. Aircraft carriers are too massive to navigate near the rocky shorelines. The American Navy is forced to send smaller patrol boats to hunt the galleys. This is exactly the close-quarters combat the ancient empire desperately wants. Roman soldiers hide beneath thick camouflage along the tight riverbanks. They wait for the modern patrol boats to slowly pass through the narrow channels. thousands of heavy iron grappling hooks are launched simultaneously from the shores. The small modern vessels are instantly snagged and pulled forcefully toward the banks. Elite Roman legionaries swarm the decks before the modern sailors can react. Assault rifles are deadly but heavily restricted by the tight spaces of the boats. Short swords and heavy shields are brutally effective in this specific environment. The Romans capture several modern patrol boats intact along with their valuable ammunition. Roman blacksmiths immediately begin studying the captured American weaponry. They cannot replicate the complex gunpowder or the internal combustion engines. They can, however, melt down the superior modern steel to forge unbreakable armor. The technological gap is slowly beginning to close in terrifying ways. The American leadership realizes their finite resources are draining far too rapidly. Every single bullet fired is a bullet they can never replace. They need a decisive victory before their mighty war machine completely starves. A massive combined assault is planned against the Grand Roman capital city. The remaining American forces push deep into the heart of Roman territory. They secure their supply lines with heavy fortifications every single mile. They refuse to fall into the same traps they suffered in the mountains. The final showdown will test the absolute limits of ancient defensive engineering. The emperor orders the capital to be turned into an absolute fortress. Millions of citizens dig trenches and build giant stone barricades. They poison the surrounding water supplies and burn their own crops. The modern invaders will find absolutely nothing but ashes and death on their approach. The modern siege of Rome begins with deafening artillery fire. American howitzers tear down the ancient stone walls from miles away. The devastating bombardment lasts for 3 entire days and nights. Rome is quickly reduced to a massive pile of smoking rubble. The infantry finally advances into the ruined streets of the ancient city. They expect to find a completely broken and terrified enemy. They instead march directly into a terrifying labyrinth of brutal death. The Romans planned for the destruction of their own city from the very beginning. The rubble creates perfect natural choke points for the advancing American soldiers. Heavy tanks cannot navigate the destroyed and totally blocked main avenues. The modern troops are forced to dismount and fight entirely on foot. This strips away their immense armor advantage in an absolute instant. Roman ambush parties strike relentlessly from the ruined rooftops. They drop massive jars of highly flammable liquid onto the American squads. The thick chemical sticks to modern combat armor and burns with intense heat. Extinguishing the ancient fire is almost entirely impossible for the modern medics. The American commanders deploy advanced aerial drones to scout the deadly streets. The small machines easily fly over the rubble to spot the ancient ambushes. Modern sniper teams use this digital data to quickly eliminate the Roman commanders. The technological gap suddenly swings the brutal urban warfare back toward America. The Romans realize they are losing the fierce fight for the surface. They retreat deep into the massive catacombs winding completely beneath the city. The Americans pursue them using advanced night vision goggles and heavy flashlights. They believe the darkness will offer the ancient warriors absolutely no protection. This arrogant assumption becomes the greatest modern mistake of the entire war. The Romans know every single inch of the pitch-black tunnels. They intentionally smash their own oil lamps to plunge the catacombs into absolute darkness. The American troops rely entirely on their battery-powered vision devices. The ancient engineers release massive swarms of cave bats directly into the tunnels. The sheer volume of flying creatures completely blinds the modern infrared sensors. The night vision goggles become entirely useless in the chaotic underground storm. Total panic grips the highly trained modern soldiers for the very first time. Legionaries strike silently from hidden alcoves using heavy short blades. The confined spaces make modern assault rifles incredibly dangerous to friendly troops. The Americans accidentally fire upon their own men in the total blinding chaos. The underground battle turns into an absolute nightmare of blood and total confusion. The modern forces are forced to blindly retreat back to the open surface. They realize capturing the capital will cost entirely too many modern lives. The American leadership decides to simply starve the remaining Romans inside the city. They form an unbreakable perimeter around the massive smoking ruins. The Romans planned for this exact starvation tactic for many long years. Secret underground aqueducts still pump fresh mountain water into the deep catacombs. Massive subterranean storehouses are completely filled with dried grain and salted meats. The ancient empire can easily survive underground for over 10 entire years. The Americans soon realize their own food and fuel are running dangerously low. The harsh winter is rapidly approaching the desolate and completely destroyed continent. The modern supply lines are stretched impossibly thin across the vast hostile wilderness. The modern hunters are slowly becoming the hunted in this brutal war of time. The harsh winter descends upon the ruined capital. Thick snow covers the destroyed American tanks and artillery pieces. The modern soldiers are completely unprepared for the freezing temperatures without constant heating. Fuel rationing becomes a matter of immediate life and death. The Romans emerge from the hidden tunnels in the dead of night. They wear thick animal furs painted completely white to blend into the snow. The freezing American sentries cannot see the ancient ghosts approaching their frozen camps. The ancient hunters silently eliminate the modern guards one by one. The ancient empire steals hundreds of heavy modern thermal sleeping bags. They also capture thousands of highly concentrated military food rations. The Romans do not attempt to fight the main American force in the freezing snow. They simply steal the modern survival gear and vanish back underground. The American generals realize they must force the Romans out of the tunnels. They decide to flood the ancient catacombs with freezing river water. Combat engineers use remaining explosives to breach the nearby massive dam. Millions of gallons of icy water rush directly toward the ruined capital city. This seems like a completely brilliant and decisive modern victory. The Romans, however, built their massive city on extremely complex drainage systems. The ancient sewers safely divert the raging floodwaters away from the deep catacombs. The rushing water instead floods the low-lying American encampments on the surface. Heavy American artillery sinks deeply into the newly formed freezing mud. The frozen ground turns into a massive and inescapable freezing swamp. The modern war machine is now completely paralyzed by its own massive attack. The Romans watch the freezing disaster unfold from their dry underground bunkers. The American commanders desperately call for immediate aerial evacuation. The remaining heavy transport helicopters are completely grounded by the massive winter storm. They are trapped in the freezing mud with absolutely no chance of rescue. The mightiest modern military is completely defeated by ancient civil engineering. The desperate Americans send an envoy to negotiate a temporary ceasefire. The Roman emperor refuses to meet the modern diplomats on the frozen surface. He forces the proud modern generals to crawl into the dark ancient tunnels. This is a massive psychological victory for the ancient world. The Roman emperor demands all remaining modern weapons be completely surrendered. The American generals absolutely refuse to hand over their advanced assault rifles. The emperor simply smiles and offers them a single cup of hot wine. He knows the freezing weather will eventually break their modern pride. The Americans realize they have less than 3 days of food remaining. The freezing temperatures are dropping completely below zero every single night. The modern soldiers are beginning to freeze to death inside their high-tech tents. The generals finally agree to surrender a massive portion of their incredible arsenal. The Romans finally secure their first massive caches of modern firearms. They still lack the factories to produce new brass bullets or gunpowder. The emperor orders his finest scholars to completely dismantle the complex weapons. The ancient world is about to reverse engineer the modern combat rifle. The massive winter storm finally breaks after 2 entire weeks of absolute freezing hell. The remaining American forces desperately limp away from the ruined Roman capital. They leave behind thousands of perfectly intact high-tech weapons in the freezing mud. The great technological gap is now officially completely closed. Roman blacksmiths study the captured modern rifles with absolute fascination. They quickly realize they cannot reproduce the complex explosive chemical powders. They instead focus entirely on the brilliant mechanical firing pins and springs. The ancient inventors adapt these spring mechanisms into massive stationary ballistas. These newly designed siege engines launch heavy spears with terrifying modern velocity. The American forces retreat to the warm southern coast to desperately regroup. They are completely humiliated and running critically low on basic supplies. The modern generals know they must end this war before their ammunition vanishes entirely. The American leadership decides to target the massive agricultural heartland of Rome. They plan to burn millions of acres of wheat using remaining incendiary bombs. This will slowly starve the entire ancient empire instead of just the capital city. The modern bombers take to the sky for one final desperate aerial campaign. Rome anticipates this massive attack on their primary food supply perfectly. They secretly move thousands of newly built spring ballistas to the open farm fields. The ancient weapons are heavily camouflaged beneath massive piles of dried hay. The American pilots fly extremely low to drop their incendiary payloads accurately. The hidden Roman siege engines release thousands of heavy steel spears simultaneously. The incredible velocity easily pierces the lightly armored bellies of the modern bombers. Jet engines explode violently in the sky as the ancient trap is perfectly sprung. The American Air Force is completely annihilated over the vast golden wheat fields. This devastating loss destroys the final remaining modern advantage of the sky. The Americans are now permanently grounded on a massive hostile continent. They must rely entirely on their remaining naval fleet for any strategic movement. The coastal waters suddenly become the most important battlefield of the entire war. The Roman emperor knows the modern ships are completely out of aviation fuel. He orders the construction of thousands of small fire ships completely filled with pitch. The ancient navy waits patiently for the ocean currents to perfectly align. They launch the burning fleet directly toward the anchored American aircraft carriers. The massive modern warships are completely trapped in the shallow bay. Their incredibly complex defense systems cannot cannot track the thousands of small wooden targets. The burning ancient ships violently crash into the steel hulls of the modern giants. The roaring fires quickly spread across the massive modern flight decks. The American captains make a brilliant and completely desperate tactical decision. They intentionally scuttle their own massive carriers in the shallow coastal waters. The sinking steel behemoths create a massive impenetrable wall against the ancient fleet. The surviving modern sailors swim safely to a heavily fortified coastal island. The Americans now possess a completely impregnable island fortress made of sunken steel. They strip the heavy machine guns from the ruined ships to defend the beaches. The Romans cannot sail their wooden galleys past the massive sunken metal barricade. The war enters an entirely new phase of brutal psychological warfare. The modern generals realize they must break the Roman morale to survive. They use their remaining electrical generators to power massive stadium loudspeakers. They broadcast terrifying high-frequency sounds constantly across the narrow water channel. The horrible digital noise completely shatters the nerves of the ancient coastal guards. The Roman soldiers are completely terrified by the invisible auditory assault. They believe the Americans have captured angry, screaming demons in invisible boxes. The ancient troops begin to slowly abandon their crucial coastal guard posts. The emperor realizes he must counter this modern psychological weapon immediately. The Romans gather thousands of massive bronze gongs and giant animal hide drums. They create an absolute deafening wall of ancient rhythmic noise. The thunderous beating perfectly drowns out the terrifying modern digital screams. The ancient acoustic engineering completely neutralizes the advanced psychological attack. The psychological war completely fails for the modern soldiers. They are now permanently trapped on an island made of sunken aircraft carriers. The American leadership realizes they are completely cut off from all fresh water. The vast ocean surrounding them is completely undrinkable. The Roman emperor commands his massive army to build a gigantic land bridge. Millions of tons of earth and stone are dumped directly into the narrow ocean channel. The ancient engineers are perfectly recreating the legendary siege of Tyre. The land bridge slowly creeps toward the fortified steel island every single day. The American forces desperately fire their remaining heavy machine guns at the builders. The massive 50 caliber bullets easily rip through traditional wooden shields. The Romans suffer heavy casualties but simply replace the fallen workers with thousands more. The relentless ancient war machine completely ignores the massive loss of human life. The Roman engineers quickly adapt to the terrifying modern firepower. They construct massive rolling towers covered entirely in thick layers of wet sand and iron. The heavy modern bullets simply lose their massive kinetic energy in the dense wet sand. The ancient construction crews safely push the land bridge forward behind these moving walls. The modern generals watch in absolute horror as their ammunition boxes run completely empty. The heavy machine guns click silently as the final brass bullets are completely spent. The mighty American military is officially reduced to fighting with entirely empty rifles. They must now rely entirely on their steel bayonets and close-quarters combat training. The massive earthen bridge finally connects completely to the sunken steel carriers. Tens of thousands of elite Roman legionaries prepare for the final massive assault. The ancient soldiers lock their heavy iron shields together to form an impenetrable turtle formation. They slowly march across the bridge toward the exhausted and starving modern survivors. The American defenders create highly volatile traps using their remaining aviation fuel. They flood the lower decks of the sunken ships with the highly flammable liquid. They wait patiently for the Roman vanguard to enter the dark metallic corridors. A single spark is thrown to ignite the absolute massive inferno. The terrible fire completely engulfs the front lines of the ancient army. The extreme heat painfully melts the heavy iron armor directly onto the Roman soldiers. The ancient warriors scream in sheer agony as the modern fire consumes them entirely. The assault is temporarily halted by the massive wall of blazing modern fuel. The Roman emperor refuses to accept this temporary defeat. He orders his massive artillery crews to bombard the blazing ships with massive clay pots. These pots are filled completely with thick mud and heavy river water. The ancient firefighters slowly extinguish the modern inferno using thousands of flying mud bombs. The final American defenses are completely stripped away by the relentless ancient assault. The surviving modern soldiers retreat to the absolute highest point of the sunken island. They drop their empty rifles and draw their sharp steel combat knives. The ultimate clash of ancient swords and modern blades is finally about to begin. The heavily armored legionaries swarm up the steep metallic ramps of the ruined ships. The American soldiers fight with absolutely incredible bravery and unmatched tactical skill. They easily dodge the heavy ancient swords and strike quickly at the exposed Roman joints. Modern hand-to-hand combat training proves incredibly lethal against the rigid ancient formations. The sheer overwhelming numbers of the ancient empire eventually turned the bloody tide. 3 Roman soldiers fall for every single modern soldier killed in the brutal melee. The mathematical advantage of the ancient world is simply absolutely impossible to overcome. The last remaining American general finally drops his bloody knife and completely surrenders. The Roman emperor walks slowly across the bloody deck of the sunken modern ship. He looks directly at the defeated modern generals in their torn camouflage uniforms. The greatest technological military in human history is completely brought to its knees. The ancient world has officially defeated the modern titans through pure brutal attrition. The surviving American soldiers are taken as highly valuable prisoners of war. They are completely stripped of their advanced tactical gear and modern uniforms. The Roman emperor treats them with surprising respect instead of brutal ancient cruelty. He realizes their immense knowledge is far more valuable than their physical labor. The captured modern engineers are forced to explain their incredible technology. They draw complex mathematical diagrams in the dirt using simple wooden sticks. The ancient scholars watch with absolute fascination and massive intellectual hunger. They begin to slowly understand the basic principles of modern electricity and flight. Rome possesses a massive abundance of raw copper and heavy iron ore. The ancient blacksmiths are ordered to create thousands of miles of primitive wire. They follow the exact instructions of the captive American electrical engineers. The ancient world is attempting to jump forward 3,000 years in a single generation. The most brilliant Roman minds focus entirely on the captured combustion engines. They completely dismantle the massive steel blocks from the ruined American transport trucks. They slowly measure every single cylinder and complex metal gear with absolute precision. The ancient metalworkers begin casting rough copies using their hottest bronze furnaces. The American prisoners realize they are completely altering the timeline of human history. They intentionally give the Romans slightly incorrect formulas to slow down the terrifying progress. The ancient scholars are incredibly intelligent and quickly spot the mathematical lies. The punishment for giving false modern knowledge is swift and incredibly brutal. The Roman emperor orders the construction of a massive new library. This grand stone building is completely dedicated to understanding the captured American science. Thousands of ancient scribes perfectly copy the modern military training manuals. The ancient language is quickly adapted to describe highly advanced physics and chemistry. A massive breakthrough happens exactly 2 years after the final bloody battle. The Romans successfully generate their very first continuous spark of electricity. They use a massive primitive battery made entirely of clay pots and sour wine. The ancient scientists cheer wildly as a tiny modern light bulb weakly flickers to life. The captured American generals watch this terrifying event from their stone prison cells. They realize their modern civilization was entirely dependent on massive, fragile supply chains. The Romans are building a completely self-sustaining technological empire from the dirt up. The mighty modern Titan was simply a massive catalyst for ancient evolution. Rome begins secretly testing primitive steam engines to replace their animal labor. They attach these loud iron machines to their massive wooden galleys and riverboats. The ancient navy suddenly moves without heavily relying on massive sails or human oars. The first great ancient industrial revolution completely begins under the banner of the eagle. The American prisoners slowly accept their permanent new life in the ancient world. They teach the Roman farmers how to use basic crop rotation and modern sanitation. The deadly plagues that once terrorized the ancient cities are almost entirely completely eradicated. The defeated modern soldiers are ironically saving millions of ancient Roman lives. The emperor decides to completely integrate the brilliant Americans into his royal court. He gives them massive wealthy estates and beautiful ancient wives as a grand reward. The modern men slowly forget their distant past and completely embrace the Roman culture. The two distinct timelines are now permanently locked together in blood and science. Rumors begin to quickly spread across the massive unified supercontinent. The distant Eastern empires hear terrifying whispers of the new Roman magic. They send highly trained spies to completely infiltrate the heavily guarded capital city. A brand new type of ancient Cold War is slowly beginning to take shape. The Eastern Empire sends spies to steal the newly discovered Roman magic. The Romans discover the foreign assassins hiding in the massive stone libraries. The spies are captured and brutally interrogated for secret information. The ancient world is rapidly preparing for a terrifying global conflict. The American generals realize the Roman emperor desires total world domination. They know their modern weapons will soon be mass-produced by ancient factories. They decide they must assassinate the ruthless Roman emperor immediately. The wealthy prisoners form a secret rebellion deep inside their lavish estates. The modern men secretly build a single crude explosive device. They use basic farming chemistry to mix fertilizer and simple acids. They pack the deadly chemical mixture tightly inside a heavy iron vase. The deadly gift is presented to to the emperor during a grand gladiatorial game. The Roman emperor is highly paranoid and possesses incredible intuition. He senses the immense nervous energy of the captive modern generals. He forces the lead American commander to open the heavy iron vase himself. The modern men realize their final desperate assassination plot is completely exposed. The lead American general grabs the highly volatile chemical device. He charges directly toward the massive marble royal viewing platform. The elite Roman guards instantly pierce his chest with heavy spears. He smiles as the crude chemical fuse finally burns completely away. The massive explosion completely shatters the grand royal seating area. The Roman emperor and his top ancient commanders are instantly destroyed. The terrifying blast echoes across the massive stone colosseum like divine thunder. The millions of spectators erupt into absolute panic and total bloody chaos. The surviving Americans use the massive panic to escape the arena. They flee directly toward the hidden underground catacombs they once attacked. They know the massive Roman Empire will immediately fracture without a strong leader. The dangerous modern technology will surely be lost in the coming power struggle. This becomes the final incredible twist of the massive temporal war. The modern soldiers intentionally destroy their own scientific legacy to save the future. They accept they will die as completely unknown ghosts in the ancient dirt. The fragile timeline is finally perfectly restored by their ultimate bloody sacrifice. The remaining Roman generals immediately turn their swords against one another. They desperately fight to claim the completely empty imperial throne. The massive new scientific factories are intentionally burned down during the Civil War. The primitive steam engines and crude batteries are completely lost to ancient history. The great ancient library of modern science is completely burned to ashes. The brilliant Roman scholars are assassinated by rival jealous political factions. The terrifying leap in human evolution is violently stopped in its tracks. The ancient world slowly returns to the traditional path of natural human progress. The frozen modern weapons slowly rust away in the deep winter mud. The massive sunken steel aircraft carriers become completely forgotten coral reefs. The great temporal battle between the two mighty empires becomes a simple myth. The timeline continues moving forward exactly as it was originally perfectly written.